So I'm Robert Madelin, and I'm the Director General for IT things in what we call DG Connect in the European Commission.
And you've been around here in Brussels for more than 20 years. Why or how did you become hooked to the European Union?
So I joined European Public Service from the British Civil Service. I joined the British Civil Service leaving university to help improve the state of my country, particularly in the microeconomic area. And that led me into international economic relations. And since trade is an exclusive community competence, in the words of the treaty at that time, that brought me to Brussels first in the UK permanent representation, then in the cabinet of the Trade Commissioner, and then I chose to stay on because it was so exciting. Well, let me start in 1988. When I moved here, we were 12. The Berlin Wall existed. There was still numerical quotas on imports of cars from third countries. Progressively, the Berlin Wall fell, the quotas fell, Europe expanded. We had launched in '86 and we then concluded in '93 the Uruguay round. We got the Americans to agree to creating a World Trade Organization, and so on and so forth. So I would argue that the first decade of my time here was the high water mark of global economic cooperation. The second decade saw the euro, which I think is a success. It saw the economic crises and the financial governance crises, which obviously require remedial responses. But it's also seen treaties from Maastricht onwards expanding the degree of cooperation in areas from monetary union to health, to foreign and security policy, to home and justice. Some of these are more successful or more fast moving than others, but I think that's an enormous series of steps in a relatively short time for the history of one part of the world.
And how would you describe the current state of affairs of the EU? Some people say we may be at the height of the integration project and we will probably go down after this.
I think current affairs is very inattentive to the long timetable that human history actually requires. I mean, countries in Europe have different senses of what is a long time. In the UK, you can go back 300 years and the constitution hasn't changed much in terms of territory, but at the same time you could say during that period the global empire disappeared. So things are changing all the time. At any given moment, and the same is true of the EU, you look forward and you can't see very far, but when you look back, you've come a long way. So I would argue that being a historian and looking at slightly longer trends as a matter of habit, I am still an optimist about the European Union experiment. So let's ask ourselves to begin with, what is it that makes the European Union special apart from the recent political experiment? We're special because we're extremely rich by global standards. We are different from some other rich bits of the world in the quality of our investment. We are lagging a bit more than we used to in the quality of our education. And the aging process is advancing, making us look more like Japan did in the 80s than like India will next year. If you take these sorts of challenges, I think those are the issues that will determine how well we do in the next 50 years. The other important aspect, which is political, is we are a mature, relatively secure set of democratic peoples. And as a result, we're bored with the right to vote, for example. I was in South Africa a few weeks ago. These guys remember when they didn't have the right to vote, and they know that the coming elections are crucial. We do not remember how crucial elections can be. And I think that the biggest political challenge, therefore, is not constitution making and treaty refinement, but engaging people with something they know they need to support for their own sake. And we don't have that degree of commitment yet for the European political process.
And the big question is, are we going to lose the race with the BRICS?
I don't think that's a big question. I think relatively we're bound to lose the race with the BRICS because relatively they're growing from a very low base. They're bound to catch up. The question is, what are the things that we can do that fast-growing but perhaps still less sophisticated economies cannot yet do? What is it that makes them successful that we can copy and replicate and match? And on those two questions, I would say that the data-driven, IT-driven world is one where it's actually easier for maturing economies still to win.
Well, that brings me back to your work as DG Connect. You've been working on getting ICT more on the agenda, the digital agenda of the European Union, with a number of issues, from the digital skills gap to getting the ICT infrastructure in place, getting more focus on the educational level on ICT and other important aspects. How is this world developing, and how much is really on the agenda? For instance, the Connecting Europe facility that you really wanted hasn't come through in the hasn't been supported that much in the next EU budget, the MFF, as you wanted it to be.
Sure. So let me start with what's worked in the last 5 years. The first Europe 2020 flagship was the Digital Agenda for Europe. That was not by accident. I think the Barroso II Commission wanted to lead with digital. And I think that the fact that this bit of the Commission made the digital agenda our only business was a huge success factor. That doesn't mean to say that we stopped doing things, but the logic of everything we do meets the digital agenda. And I think that that's what made this flagship work. What was the handicap? You can't do a data strategy in one part of policy making, and the degree of coordination, the strength of coordination across the silos in the Council of Ministers, across the silos in ministries, across the silos even in the Commission, we haven't quite fixed that yet. So more joined up government would be the missing factor to do an even better data strategy for Europe coming next. And I think that the Connecting Europe facility, we won big time. We got the money we needed for digital service infrastructures. So linking governments across Europe, linking civil society across Europe to deliver public goods, that the budget authorities, even in a time of austerity, were willing to back. The piece they didn't want at European level was investment in 100 megabit per second fibre to the home connections. Okay, that was a question of relative priorities with a limited budget. That doesn't mean we're not pursuing other ways to generate that investment. So I think that the core news is actually quite good news. The ICT innovation budget is increasing still in a time of austerity. The mandate to operate in terms of IT-driven modernization of public goods is increasing, and there is some other stuff we're going to have to do either at the local level, coordinating activities to drive up apprenticeship and skills, or through the markets working on the investment case. So I don't think that the human psyche is ever ready for change. We don't like things to change. In my own family, the jobs that my last 2 generations of parents and grandparents did have all disappeared or gone from being mainstream jobs to marginal. And so I don't think that this sort of creative destruction is new. The fact that it's IT-driven, technology-driven is also not new. I mean, when I was in primary school, but we were basing ourselves on the Enlightenment already, we were talking about, do labour-saving devices mean unemployment or creativity space for the human being? These are not new dilemmas. I think that they are getting centre stage again because unemployment is high, and in Europe they play to pessimism. They play to the feeling that we're not flexible enough. Good. So then let's get more flexible. There are labour market solutions that have been lying on the table in most member states, not used, in some member states used to good effect for decades. We now need to get serious about that. But this is not a problem with technology, and it's not a reason to feel fear about the future for Europe. I'm an optimist about the capacity for human cooperation. In other words, I actually don't think we need to change the treaty, bring competences to Brussels in order to fix the problem. What we do need to fix the problem, and it's a global lack at the moment, is seriously effective political leadership. I think it's not by accident that this is the 3rd year, I think, where the World Economic Forum is putting the lack of global leadership at an increasingly high point in its risk register. So if we bring that home to Europe, what does it mean? It means people have noticed that we're good at talking and bad at doing. I don't believe that you get more done by saying Brussels alone has to act. The Global Coalition on Jobs and Skills, which we were talking about in Davos this year, is a very good example where we have created a European space, and we're now seeing people coming into it saying we want to act together as economic operators, as academic institutions, to get the right skills for a data-driven economy more quickly. Thousands of teachers are being retrained even in the last year. More thousands are coming. Thousands of new apprenticeships have been created. More are coming. We haven't got the right scale of answer yet, but starting from nothing 18 months ago, I think this shows that if you identify the right question in a clever way, the real actors in the local level will come together to find the solutions. At the global governance level, there's a very neat theory from Philip Czerny around what he calls what does he call it? International neopluralism. Okay. Or transnational neopluralism. Let me get that right. So Czerny's book on transnational neopluralism, firstly, the national territorial boundaries are dissolving, but so are the boundaries between different sorts of actors. So you could call it multi-stakeholderism at the global level. And I think that our inability yet to think that's a good alternative to what we always do is a handicap. Because if you go out there and you say, anybody who wants to be part of the solution, come here, let's work out how we can cooperate. We have now the tools, network media tools, to bring ourselves together, to agree some goals, to run some metrics and mutual reporting, to share resources. So we can do it. And one of the aspects of research that we're subsidizing under Horizon 2020 is around what we call collective awareness platforms. If you give people the means to come together, can we fix the problem easier? Or rather, can they fix the problem easier? You have the vision of government as a platform. So government is not the actor, it provides the solid point from which society leverages the solution. And I think more and more we have to experiment with those sorts of approaches. I don't think that is necessarily going to be a zero-sum game with the nation state and with public authority, but it requires a much more sophisticated approach from within the traditional centres of power. I think that the future is understood in pockets. And so part of what we have to do in a year like this in Brussels is to use the political process to change the word cloud, to move towards a more foresight-driven process, a more goal-oriented process, a more networked process, a more participatory process. These are the things I hope that the next College of Commissioners, the next intake of the European Parliament will more clearly understand than we've been able to understand 10 or 15 years ago, so that we can go on pushing a digital agenda, but it's not a digital agenda top-down, it's not a government will do this agenda, it's rather an agenda for everyone. The other part of the problem, I think, if that's what you want, is twofold. Firstly, you need a vision that is holistic. You need a sort of digital Maslow's pyramid showing how the broadband stuff connects with fulfillment and creativity over the internet. And then you need a means of accessing this cooperative game, which is really open to everybody. Europe is a strong global player because we are ourselves experimenting internally. The reason we were very powerful advocates of global economic integration outside, globally, was that we were experimenting with the single market, including for services, including for value-added network services. So we were miles ahead of others, theorizing and doing international economic openness. And it's still true. So the things I've just described can work in a town, they can work in a region, a country, at the European Union, and at the global level. And if we're playing with them in the European space, that will trickle down, but it will also enable us to be exemplars and partners at the global level.
To conclude, what's your view on or expectation of the next European elections in May 2014?
never predict the future as a
No,
permanent
no,
civil
but
servant.
we see this-
Let me say, I suspect that I will still be disappointed by the turnout. I mean, it really strikes me that we have forgotten why it matters to use your democratic right and to fulfill your democratic responsibility. As to where will the balance of parties take us, I would be an optimist. You'll see a bit more populism, extremism, but the centre will hold. Maybe the centre will need some grand coalition, at least an understanding between the mature and responsible party groups to make sure the Parliament continues to function even more efficiently. But I think those would be my two predictions. Disappointing turnout, yes, but no populist takeover.
Any other ways to reconnect Europe with 500 million citizens it has? If you look at the latest Eurobarometer figures, it's quite worrisome that people are losing trust or turning their back on Brussels.
Yeah, we have to take the trouble to come up with a story that meets what citizens think they want. The way I say it is you have to show them the whole sausage. Typically the bureaucracy takes a sausage, which is people's lives, and slices it into very fine slices and shows them a slice or two at a time. That's not very enticing. What we want is the whole sausage. And in a way, the Maslow pyramid discipline is a way of saying, you know, don't tell me about hyperfast networks without telling me in the same breath how this improves my self-fulfillment. How does it give me agency? How does it feed me? And I think we miss that. We assume people understand why we're saying 100 meg. We have to get the whole story.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much to you.